Greetings, I'm the one called Horror Show, and welcome to VG Therapy, the channel where I talk about games. Want to see a game I played as a toddler? Want to see a game that says a lot about me? Well, here's Conker's Bad Fur Day. A game that I didn't actually own as a kid. It was bought by a family friend for his son, and the family friend saw his son playing it via decapitating the final boss with a katana. At which point he figured, hey, damage is done, I'll let them keep it. You know, there's no point in me taking it away because there's nothing I'm saving them from. And the thing is, while I'm holding the N64 version, it's not going to be the version I'll actually play. The version I'll play is the HD version through Rare Replay.
Conker's Bad Fur Day was released in early 2001 for the N64 and developed by Rare, who you might remember for such classics such as the Banjo and Donkey Kong Country /64 games. And that is part of the reason as to why Bad Fur Day is the way it is.
Because Rare had kind of built up an idea as to what they were like. And so when they showed off the prototype Conker's Bad Fur Day, then called Conker's 12 Tales, people were just kind of, about it, because it's like, oh, it's more Banjo, more kind of Donkey Kong 64, oh yeah, whatever. More of that kind of stuff, yeah, whatever. And so, looking at that, Rare kind of changed gears and changed focus and remade the game from the ground up.
Because for those of you who aren't too familiar, Conker's Bad Fur Day isn't a collectathon. No, it's a lot more linear and set-piece orientated. Instead of going into a level and going after one of the many tasks, you instead go do one task, which opens up the next task, which opens up the next until you are done with the level and move on. Like, for example, the Barn Boys chapter. You get tasked with getting rid of a rat who you need to overfeed until he explodes, which grants you access to a switch that unlocks a previously locked door. That once inside, you have a back and forth with a pitchfork, which leads to a small puzzle involving leading him around, and after that another door is unlocked, which going through lets you do a small tightrope challenge that you can just skip by jumping over it. But at the end of it, you do a small task that leads you to a boss fight with 2 phases, and once that's done, you do a couple of knife throwing challenges so you can get to the next area, which leads you up to the top of a tower that opens a door with the cash you need to collect, so you're done with the area. Because yeah, I said this isn't a collectathon, but there is one collectible which is cash that sort of acts like jiggies, but since you can't really skip any of them and they're all pretty much on the critical path, you can't really avoid them, unlike certain jiggies. Now, there are a few quote-unquote side quests, like the Sunflower quest in Barn Boys, which, yeah, that's a thing.
As I said, they wanted to go in a different direction with it. They made tongue-in-cheek jokes before, but they were never this explicit, which for a lot of people is the appeal. Because you have the same British humour, but now they're just going off the walls with it.
Like you have the infamous Great Mighty Pooh, known for obvious reasons, but also for just being a random musical segment in the game. And since they were doing whatever the hell they felt like, they also included a ridiculous amount of movie references. So many that the one I'm showing you is going to be the only one I do because I don't have all day.
Now the thing is, this game is looked fondly upon and remembered well because of its charm. And that's not to say that the gameplay is bad, it's just nothing really to write home about.
Because the basic gameplay is like Rare's of the 3D platformers. You can run, you can jump, you can hit things with a frying pan, you can crouch jump, and Conker can use his tail to hover. However, there are a number of B pads in the game which are context sensitive, as in sensitive to context, where if you press B while standing on one, Conker will pull out or do whatever is needed at that given moment in time. Be it a slingshot, bricks to hit a boss with, a battery to put into his helmet, or an assortment of other things.
Now you're either going to like this or you're going to hate this, because there's no real through line in what you do.
One minute you're leading a baby dinosaur to the sacrificial table, the next you're in a club rolling rockmen around the only way you know how. I personally enjoy this, because I've always enjoyed a more structured series of challenges over in an open world for me to mess around in. I just don't particularly care for the sandbox designs of Banjo and the like, they're just not my cup of tea.
So a 3D platform that just gives me task after task is something that I do enjoy. And now there are a few bits I'm not too flash on, namely the last couple of chapters. Mainly war, but spooky to a lesser extent as well.
Because running around works in Bad Fur Day. Riding a bull, a hoverboard, and a dinosaur also work. Even the bat you play as for the first part of Spooky is fine. But the intro and outro to Spooky and almost the entirety of War requires you to shoot enemies with your gun. Now here's the issue. 2001. Nintendo 64. Console's way of handling shooters wasn't the same way as they do now. Conker almost gets it right, but wrong enough that it hurts me brain. Normally you move with the left stick and the camera is controlled with the right stick, which back then were the C buttons. But when aiming, the left stick controls where you aim, and for the moments where you can move, the right stick controls your movement. Boy do I hate that! Because in order to actually aim, I would basically play it like Resident Evil 4 and not move while I aimed. but unfortunately the game throws fast enemies and enemies that can shoot you back, so you can't really stand still. So it just ended up being really awkward and finicky to get through these levels.
At least the first time playing them, they were hard. The second time though, they were pretty easy. And the second time I was playing them was when I was playing Conker Live and Reloaded, the remake for the original Xbox back in 2005. Now this is a version that back then looked really good and I think still holds up to this day. And of course I say that with the full knowledge that while I never owned Conker's Bad Fur Day as a baby, I did own this as a kid and I played the hell out of it, so yeah, I'm a little bit biased, but I'll try my best.
Now, visuals aren't the only thing updated. They tweaked a bunch of the single-player content, a lot of which is debatable as to whether or not it's better. Like, for instance, in 64, when you pressed B off a pad, you would swing a frying pan. In Live and Reloaded, you take out a baseball bat and you can do more with it. Now, there are some changes to accommodate the easier combat, such as enemies where they weren't previously. However, there are a couple of challenges which require you to run after something and time you hit with it. But now you don't. You just run up to the thing you need to hit and take out your bat and swing while still moving, so as a result, it's a ton easier. And there are a bunch of other things made easier, like Conker can hold his breath for so much longer underwater, the amount of Rockman you need to push around in Rock Solid has been reduced, and a number of other small changes have been changed and remixed. However, the most confusing change is that the game is censored.
And the thing is, the 64 version, that one was also censored, but it comes across more as intentional and for the sake of comedy, because sometimes beeps can be funnier than swear.
But in Live and Reloaded, they censored stuff that was previously uncensored. Now, this isn't the worst, it's dumb, but it's negligible, except for the fact that you have the Great Mighty Pooh's song now having beeps throughout it that stand out.
But also, as a kid, there was a few points where they said something that I didn't understand, but then in Live and Reloaded, they censored it, so it didn't tell me what it meant, but it told me it was inappropriate.
However, the game now being on Xbox and after shooters had evolved to the point where they found the control standards that they would use for at least a decade at this point, meant that Spooky and War are a ton easier. Although as you can see, there are a few visual changes which brings up a couple of questions. In War, while on the boat, did they strip and change Conker? Because in 64 they just gave him a helmet, but here he's in uniform. And in Spooky, Conker is suddenly dressed as Van Helsing because that was a big movie at the time, I guess. While odd isn't the weirdest part of this, because what I want to draw attention to is the fact that the shotgun has been replaced with a blunderbuss, but they still say shotgun and refer to it as being double-barreled despite the fact that the original wasn't either.
Also, why did just these two chapters get new costumes?
In 64, the only time you changed what you're wearing was in Unga Bunga where Conker gets a hat, and the Heist where the entire level is just a Matrix parody. So why not go all out and give him a new costume every chapter? Is it because you didn't need to? Is it because what he was wearing was fine? Well, I mean, I guess that's a valid excuse. Although you can make that argument for Spooky and War, and you really should.
But even without that, it just makes these two chapters stand out.
Because Unga Bunga Conker just found a hat and put it on because he could, and in the Heist he requested a cool outfit. War and Spooky just have him changing between fade to blacks, and it's just kind of odd.
The other thing that's odd is the complete overhaul to the multiplayer.
In 64, you had a variety of modes that you could play, all of which I remember being fun. Can't really test them all too well because of the troubles, but dabbling in them solo tells me that they're alright. But in Live and Reloaded, they replaced it with a team-based third-person shooter, with multiple classes to play as and a campaign to play through. This is where the live part of Live and Reloaded comes from. And I remember hearing as a kid that the multiplayer was going to be its own standalone release, but then they added on a remake of the original, but as of right now, I can't find any traces of that being true.
But I believed it because the front of the box and about half of the back of the box and about 80 to 90% of the manual was dedicated to the multiplayer.
So I guess it was revamped because they wanted to push Xbox Live. However, it would have been cool to keep the original alongside of it, because while this multiplayer is fine, if I had to bring one to a group of friends with an optimal setup, I'll still bring the original.
Now as to which version is better, well, it's not really that easy of a question to answer, because Live and Reloaded fixed some things but also made some things worse. And so it's really going to come down to you and to what you value as to how bad those mess-ups are and how good those fixes are. And if you have to ask me, if you have to get an answer out of me, then I'd personally say go with 64, based on a gut feeling. But really, you can go with either, and I don't think you're going to have that bad of a time. And now, the score I'd give these games, I'm going to have to tell you again, rests heavily on its humor. Now, if you don't like the kind of humor that this game is presented, then there's nothing really here for you. The whole appeal is its humor. And so for me, someone who likes the humor, I'd say this game is a 3 out of 4. A good recommendation. But, again, that just rests heavily on your sense of humor, and whether or not it lines up with Conker's Bad Fur Day. And with that, I've been Horror Show, and this was VG Therapy.